Thanks for coming to our Superior Poetry Cafe. I'm Susan James, Assistant Director here at Bayliss Library. Our next Poetry Cafe will be on Thursday, March 14th at 7 p.m. with Renee Dreiling as the featured poet, and she's here tonight. We look forward to that. Tonight we're pleased to be hosting Diana Pingatore and Jillena Rose. Diana is a retired professor of English at LSSU, where she taught for over 20 years and offered seminars on the works of Emily Dickinson. Jillena is an instructor of composition and creative writing at LSSU, and tonight they will share with us their exploration of Emily Dickinson and T.S. Eliot by reading and discussing their works. Afterwards, we'll take a short break before the open mic, and if you'd like to share a poem, your favorite poem, or one that you've written, please sign up. There's a sign-up sheet at the back. And please welcome Diana Pingatore to start us off.
Hello. First of all, thanks to Susan. I think her contributions to this community have been extraordinary. The whole, the library as a place for community to meet, I think has really improved a good deal with her work. So, yes, as she mentioned, I don't remember if it was Jillena or myself or both of us, we sort of concocted this idea, and Susan decided to go along with us. So this is a pleasure for us to talk about and share with other people some of the poets whose work we've studied and loved, and so I'm very grateful for that opportunity tonight. Emily Dickinson, in general, is someone that almost everybody has had a bit of exposure to, and it's almost pretty predictable which poems you have read, unless you've gone outside of an anthology of sort. Her poems are often presented as small, and they are small for the most part. She doesn't write 2 or 3 page poems. But I think that has been a little bit misleading. And another thing with her, like many authors, I think, who are quite original, it takes a while to build an audience for the new kind of poetry that you're writing. And in Dickinson's case, she, of course, was a contemporary of Walt Whitman, who is another pillar of American poetry. And between the two of them, they actually laid the foundations for American poetry, especially as it turned into the 20th century, where, of course, we get lots of new experimentation. But both Dickinson and Whitman gave us some forms. They were already playing around with traditional forms. In Whitman's case, the long line and the long poem. But with Dickinson, we have something that looks like a traditional poem on the page. And mainly what she uses is the hymn form, the Christian hymn. And so her poems tend to be short. They have the orthography is unusual. If you've looked at her poems, they have capitals where you might not expect them. There are dashes. Ideas just kind of leap among each other. There's sort of an arc there, if you will. But it can be a little challenging to sort of figure out where this thing is going. Another aspect of her poems, which I think again applies to anybody who's doing very original work, is that you almost have to spend some time with at least a fairly decent group of them. Because like other original writers, she teaches you how to read her poems by doing it. And that was certainly my experience with Emily Dickinson. I really came to love her work. I'd always been interested in it, but I really came to love it when I taught it, which is often the case for teachers. You know how you really become acquainted with an author's work when you have to talk about it and attempt to explain it to someone else. So I thought I would start tonight just a little bit of her background, just very quickly. She was born in 1830 and she lived to 1886. She was 56 years old when she died. a Bright's disease. At least that's the best kind of interpretation we have at this point. The medical world, of course, not being what it is today. And it appeared that she had several bouts of something that we might call depression or something of that sort throughout her life. She was always a very, very sensitive young girl, and then later woman, and I think that comes through in the poetry. I mean, she literally sees things and makes connections that you or I would not do. But when you see them, you recognize how perfect they really are. So I want to start reading a poem by somebody else about Emily Dickinson. And this addresses the idea, if you've had any other contact with Emily Dickinson, you've probably heard her referred to as the Belle of Amherst, the woman in the white dress who was a recluse and never came out, which are all true, but they're a little bit misleading in terms of the kind of poetry she writes. But this author, Linda Patson, wrote this poem about Emily Dickinson and about the myth about her, that she was certainly at her time considered a poetess, which means you're not a real poet. You know, you're a woman who's writing little verses. And that was how she was seen, but this author gives us a little different perspective. We think of her hidden in a white dress among the folded linens and sachets of well-kept cupboards, or just out of sight, sending jellies and notes with no address to all the wandering Amherst neighbors. Eccentric as a New England weather, the stiff wind of her mind, stinging or gentle, blew two half-imagined lovers off. Yet legend won't explain the sheer sanity of vision, the serious mischief of language, the economy of pain. And I think in that poem, Patson has drawn attention to both the myth but also the surprises that belong in Dickinson's poetry. She wrote a total of just under 1,800 poems. What I find very interesting about that is in the years between 1860 to 63, she wrote 663 poems. That was really the most fruitful time of her life. And remember, of course, the Civil War is going on at this point, so it's kind of a counterpoint to what's going on in the outside world and what she's thinking and observing and writing about in her own world. She did have a little bit of education. She went to Amherst Academy and then to Mount Holyoke Seminary. And her education was quite classical. It included languages, science. She was quite interested in science and things like that. And of course, her father was quite a respected person in the community, and they were fairly well off. And her father had an extensive library to which she had considerable access. Plus she read her contemporaries and on occasion met them. They came to her home because her father was such a well-known figure. So she's not somebody that just hid herself and just produced these poems without any interaction with the rest of the world. But she certainly made some choices, and she talks about those in her poetry. I thought, first of all, I'd read just a couple of small ones that refer to the nature around her. And you will see that she has the scientist's eye. She observes in considerable detail, but that observation is almost immediately translated into a poetic form. I'll try to give you a couple of examples of that. This one is called "The Lightning Has a Yellow Face." Just take a moment here to get to it. There are so many, I really couldn't write them all out. But this one is "The lightning is a yellow fork," excuse me. "The lightning is a yellow fork from tables in the sky. By inadvertent fingers drop the awful cutlery of mansions never quite disclosed and never quite concealed. The apparatus of the dark to ignorance revealed." And if you think that what she's physically the world, we have a lightning thunderstorm going on, and then she takes that and makes it something that suggests a much deeper darkness and a more inexplicable force that of course goes beyond just the moment of the lightning storm itself, and registers with her in terms of her work. Often is something imagining the uncertainties of life, the uncertainties of the afterlife, etc. So it's one of those that I think reveal more than it would seem to on the surface. We have another one that just observes nature and how nature uses color. And she tends to use color quite extensively in her work, and of course adds layers and layers of meaning to it. This one, Nature Rarer, uses color, and she uses that word rarer. You will see that her diction sometimes is quite idiosyncratic. Nature Rarer uses yellow than any other hue, save she all of that for sunsets prodigal of blue. Spending scarlet like a woman, yellow she affords, only scantly and selectly like a lover's words. I think that one is pretty self-explanatory. She also has another one about the sky is low. She obviously spent a lot of her time observing the physical world around her. And I understand that she did drawings and things like this that are quite detailed and quite accurate, and show that knowledge of her background somewhat in science as well as in others. This one is, the sky is low, the clouds are mean, a traveling flake of snow across a barn or through a rut debates if it will go. A narrow wind complains all day how someone treated him. Nature, like us, is something caught without her diadem. I like that, catching something that is a little bit unaware about what you're doing. Those poems of nature, however, were not all sort of painterly and almost worshiping of nature. She understands the threat in nature as well. And in one of her poems that I especially like, it's called As Imperceptible as Grief. Get here. Oh, okay, here we are. By the way, her poems do not have titles, and they're numbered, and the numbering is an attempt to reflect the timeline of the composition, but it's sometimes disputed. But for our purposes, that doesn't matter. But if you try to find them, you'll have to work by the number. As imperceptibly as grief, the summer lasts away. Too imperceptible at last to seem like perfidy. A quietness distilled as twilight long begun, of nature spending with herself sequestered afternoons. The dusk drew earlier in, the morning foreign shone, a courteous yet harrowing grace as guest that would be gone. And so she imagines that the piercing absence of summer and how quickly it can go, and suggests that is like some human interactions as well. This one I thought I'd read because we're almost here. It's called March. March is the month of expectations, the things we do not know. The persons of prognostication are coming now. We try to show becoming firmness, but pompous joy betrays us as his first betrothal betrays a boy. So those of us who live in the UP know all about that. By the way, of course, she lived in Massachusetts, so she had some understanding of weather. And at one point she says something to the idea that November is the Norway of the year. And I always think about that, and it seems so perfect. She talks about religion. I'll just read a couple of small things she has about that. And she was troubled by doubt. And of course, during this time period, that is an overriding concern of the larger culture as well. She has a poem which is called Faith. Faith is a fine invention when gentlemen can see, but microscopes are prudent in an emergency. So she's having a little discussion there between science and faith. Another one that shows that she has some other ideas about religion other than, and her family does have this Puritan background, and she's sort of the rebel in the family. This one is some keep the Sabbath going to church. Some keep the Sabbath going to church. I keep it staying at home with a bobolink for a chorister and an orchard for a dome. Some keep the Sabbath in surplus. I just wear my wings. And instead of tolling the bell for church, our little sexton sings a bird. God preaches a noted clergyman. The sermon is never long. And so instead of getting to heaven at last, I'm going all along. So she has that whimsical sort of way about her perception, as well as the more serious poems. One of the things that especially drew me to Dickinson, and I think from my perspective that she does this probably better than any poet I know, she looks into those moments of recognition, of deep, deep experience for which most of us have no words. And she somehow manages to capture that. One of the critics I've read suggested that these observations or recognitions are kind of like psychic black holes. It's not something we could verbalize ourselves, but again, when you hear it, you know it's true. One of the first ones, and she wrote this fairly early on. Another thing about Dickinson is that her poems don't necessarily grow over time, excuse me, which is what we expect from a poet or a writer, but they seem to come, fully grown. And so some of her early ones can be just as powerful as some of her later ones. This one is I Like a Look of Agony. I like a look of agony because I know it's true. Men do not sham convulsions or simulate a throe. The eyes glaze over, and that is death, impossible to feign. The beads upon the forehead by homely anguish strung. That comparison there, using the homely comparison of beads on the forehead, which of course we recognize as a general idiom, but she just sort of manages to say what agony is. That would be difficult probably for us. Another one is there's a certain slant of light, and I often think of this as we're going through the dark time in October, November, December, and it seems to me to capture that particular time of year. There's a certain slant of light, winter afternoons, that oppress us like the heft of cathedral tombs. Heavenly hurt it gives us. We can find no scar, but internal differences where the meanings are. None may teach it, any, 'tis the seal of despair, an imperial affliction, scent of us, the air. When it comes, the landscape listens, shadows hold their breath. When it goes, 'tis like the distance on the look of death. I particularly like that image of the cathedral and how the darkness, it hovers over such a massive structure, and she seems to capture what that feels like to us in that gray period, that time of year. She also writes, and these are poems that I did not come upon until later in my career, but she writes a lot of poems about being a poet or about poetry. And they're not always obvious that they're about that, but it's always a delight to discover that that might be what she's talking about. Of course, you might have heard some of popular ones, and I'll just read one of those for you, which is still nonetheless quite an important observation. But you probably have heard this one. Much madness is divinest sense to a discerning eye. Much sense, the starkest madness. 'Tis the majority in this, as all will prevail. Assent, and you are sane. Demur, you are straightway dangerous and handled with a chain. She sort of captures how poetry is conceived in this, but also that sense that it is a kind of madness, which is historically an idea that sometimes poets embraced and sometimes they refuse to do that. She tells us also how she has always known that she had this special gift, and that she always felt the need to resist the traditional implications of being a master of words. This one I particularly like. It's one where she talks about being a child and coming to her poetic life later on. They shut me up in prose as when a little girl. They put me in the closet because they liked me still. Still, could themselves have peeped and seen my brain go round, they might as wise have lodged a bird for treason in the pound. Himself has but to will, and easy as a star, abolish his captivity and laugh. No more have I. So that idea that something wants to come out that's in there and that has been somehow suppressed by the society around her. She, let me see which one I'll do one more here about being the poet. She makes this declaration of her knowledge of her own value, which of course the society around her did not recognize, and much to their chagrin had they been around when they realized she was going to be one of the major poets of American literature. Let's see, 5, 8, 5. I can't read my own writing. Okay. This is about what she sees as her charge as a poet. I would not paint a picture. I'd rather be the one, its bright impossibility to dwell delicious on, whose rare celestial stir evokes so sweet a torment, such sumptuous despair. I would not talk like cornets. I'd rather be the one raised softly to the ceilings and out and easy on through villages of ether, my self-endued balloon but by a lip of metal the pier to my pontoon. Nor would I be a poet, it's finer, own the ear, enamored, impotent, content, the license to revere, a privilege so awful, what would the dower be, had I the art to stun myself with bolts of melody? I think I will stop it there, get a sense of how powerful her work can be, and what kind of insight that she has into it, and how much she's contributed to our American literature. And so over to you.
Thank you. I think we're doing this, I don't know that we planned it that way, but we're doing this in chronological order tonight in terms of our poets. I want to talk a little bit and read a little bit of T.S. Eliot's work tonight. And just to give you a little, kind of put him in context with Emily Dickinson. He was born in 1888 in St. Louis, Missouri. His father owned a brick-making factory at a time when St. Louis was in the process, I think, of becoming what they called the Paris of the Midwest. So he grew up in an industrial family. He had a very fine education at Harvard and in England, and spent most of his life in Paris and in London. He went through the 2 world wars over there, and he died the year I was born, in 1965. So I'm kind of going to do all my talking up front, and then just read to you from this book-length collection of poems called the Four Quartets, that are 4 poems, not surprisingly, since it's called Four Quartets. But they're each on their own, sectioned into 4 or 5 shorter poems. So I'm just going to share some of it with you. But I want to tell you the experience with this, my experience with this poem through words I wrote to a friend as I began to put my thoughts together for the presentation. I've chosen the poem that surprised me the most in my reaction to it. I had to read the Four Quartets for a master's class during my graduate program. And I have to tell you up front, and I have to confess to my American Lit 2 professor, that it was with some dread I found I had to read T.S. Eliot. Because Dr. Pingatore, I hated the love song of J. Alfred Proof. But I had to read it, the Four Quartets. So I began reading and found the poetry flat, disappointing, and vague. I was reading out loud to try to grasp what was going on. It wasn't clear. I read through the first 3 pages, and admittedly it was the reading of a hurried and frustrated student, and became more and more depressed that part of my precious master's program was going to be eaten up with yet another obscure Eliot poem. Then I got to these lines. At the still point of the turning world, neither flesh nor fleshless, neither from nor towards, at the still point there the dance is, but neither arrest nor movement, and do not call it fixity, where past and future are gathered, neither movement from nor towards, neither ascent or decline, except for the point, the still point, there would be no dance, and there is only the dance. I cried. I didn't know why or how it happened. What came before could in no way have hinted at a moment of recognition in my soul, but there it was. And for me, that was enough to hang in there with a poem that could move me musically, in spite of the fact that through the first few reads, I could not entirely grasp what the poem meant. Now, 8 years later, I know why the poem drew me in. Because Eliot and I and many humans were and are on the same journey, and even though he's passed, I know we are standing in the same place to make sense of our journey at the still point of the turning world. In one sense, Eliot was a modernist poet. He, like all modernists, lived through the horror of 2 world wars that caused the deep doubt and questioning that come from the witness of gross, inhumane violence and disregard for life. Whether it is the tragedy of epic universal destruction or the atom bombs of our own personal lives that have the same effect of leaving us questioning everything we once knew or believed. One source describes the modernist mindset in this way. In general, the term modernism encompasses the activities and output of those who felt the traditional forms of art, architecture, literature, religious faith, social organization, and daily life were becoming outdated in the new economic, social, and political conditions of an emerging, fully industrialized world. The poet Ezra Pound's 1934 injunction to make it new was paradigmatic of the movement's approach towards the obsolete. Part of this purging for the modernists included doing away with the idea of a compassionate, all-powerful creator. While Eliot retained modernist ideals of needing to revise modes of expression and thought, he learned, perhaps, as most of us do through failed experiment, that some things must be embraced in order to find value in the inevitable human journey. At some point in all of our rushing around, all of us ask, is that all there is? For Eliot, this was manifested in the ancient sacraments. The answer that he found was manifested in the sacraments of the Anglican Catholic Church. But, having dropped a name that it can exclude as much as welcome a reader into this conversation, let me say, this is not a Catholic poem. I want to stress that the truth Eliot discovered in one practice has been praised for ages in many practices. Eliot was at heart a sacramentalist. That is, he believed that the divine is present in all divinely created things, in all of nature and in all of humanity. Taoists, Buddhists, Hindus, Native Americans, all see and believe this to be true as well. What is real for Eliot, what matters, this presence in us and in our world, is the reason and the comfort for moving ahead when things fall apart. I couldn't see that in the winter of 2005, struggling with his words and the chaos in my own life. 8 years later, on the other side of my degree, and a time of coming apart to build again. I reread Eliot and wonder how I could not have seen what was there. But part of me who stood in the dance before I understood the dance, did know. Those first tears over those words were my first sacrament. What I want to share with you tonight are pieces from each section of Eliot's Four Quartets that may seem contextually obscure. Really, they might. It's okay. But are musically rich and enticing. They represent for me what this poem contains in abundance and what the critic Thomas Howard calls a vibrant stillness. It is a poem, I warn you up front, that is best read and begs to be read in stillness, free of distraction, and I encourage you to pick it up and experience it personally sometime when you have that kind of time outside of time to embrace it. Okay, now to his work. I want to begin with the first section of the first poem, which is Burnt Norton, so that you can experience what I experienced. Burnt Norton, 1. Time present and time past are both perhaps present in time future, and time future contained in time past. If all time is eternally present, all time is unredeemable. What might have been is an abstraction, remaining a perpetual possibility only in a world of speculation. What might have been and what has been point to one end, which is always present. Footfalls echo in the memory down the passage which we did not take, towards the doors we never opened into the rose garden. My words echo thus in your mind, but to what purpose, disturbing the dust on a bowl of rose leaves, I do not know. Other echoes inhabit the garden. Shall we follow? Quick, said the bird, find them, round the corner, through the first gate, into our first world. Shall we follow the deception of the thrush into our first world? There they were, dignified, invisible, moving without pressure over the dead leaves in the autumn heat, through the vibrant air. And the bird called in response to the unheard music hidden in the shrubbery, and the unseen I-beam crossed, for the roses had the look of flowers that are looked at. There they were as our guests, accepted and accepting. So we moved, and they, in a formal pattern, along the empty alley into the box circle to look down into the drain pool. Dry the pool, dry concrete, brown edged, and the pool was filled with water out of sunlight, and the lotus rose quietly. The surface glittered out of heart of light, and they were behind us, reflected in the pool. Then a cloud passed, and the pool was empty. Go, said the bird, for the leaves were full of children, hidden excitedly, containing laughter. Go, 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 said the bird. Humankind cannot bear very much reality. Time past and time future, what might have been and what has been, point to one end, which is always present. 2. Garlic and sapphires in the mud clot the bedded axle tree. The trilling wire in the blood sings below inveterate scars, appeasing long-forgotten wars. The dance along the artery, the circulation of the lymph are figured in the drift of stars, the sun to summer in the tree. We move above the moving tree and light upon the figured leaf, and here upon the sodden floor, below the boarhound and the boar pursue their pattern as before, but reconciled among the stars. At the still point of this turning world, neither flesh nor fleshless, neither from nor towards, at the still point there the dance is, but neither arrest nor movement. And do not call it fixity, where past and future are gathered, neither movement from nor towards, neither ascent nor decline, except for the point, the still point. There would be no dance, and there is only the dance. So that's the first part. I want to read the final section of Burnt Norton, because I think it contains something we all do as we get older, and that's sort of a backing up and taking stock and trying to figure out what we know. Number 5. So here I am in the middle way, having had 20 years largely wasted, the years of l'entre-deux-guerres, trying to learn to use words, and every attempt is a wholly new start and a different kind of failure, because one has only learned to get the better of words, for the thing one no longer has to say, or the way in which one is no longer disposed to say it. And so each venture is a new beginning, a raid on the inarticulate, with shabby equipment always deteriorating in the general mess of imprecision of feeling, undisciplined squads of emotion, and what there is to conquer by strength and submission has already been discovered once or twice or several times by men whom one cannot hope to emulate. But there is no competition. There is only the fight to recover what has been lost and found and lost again and again, and now under conditions that seem unpropitious, but perhaps neither gain nor loss. For us, there is only the trying. The rest is not our business. Home is where one starts from. As we grow older, the world becomes stranger, the pattern more complicated of dead and living. Not the intense moment isolated with no before and after, but a lifetime burning in every moment, and not the lifetime of one man only, but of old stones that cannot be deciphered. There is a time for the evening under starlight, a time for the evening under lamplight, the evening with the photograph album. Love is most nearly itself when here and now cease to matter. Old men ought to be explorers. Here and there does not matter. We must be still and still moving into another intensity. For a further union, a deeper communion through the dark cold and the empty desolation, the wave cry, the wind cry, the vast waters of the petrel and the porpoise, in my end is my beginning. I'll read to you now from the third poem, which is called The Dry Salvages. The Dry Salvages are a group of rocks with a beacon on them off of Cape Ann in Massachusetts. I like this first section because in the previous section he talks a lot about the imminent decay, whether it's of a house or of the way we can't hide what we think or what we feel riding on a train, someone can see it. He talks about the decay of man-made edifices or facades. And here he shifts and begins to talk about the natural cycle of things. And his voice changes a little bit. It feels less maybe authoritarian and more relaxed. I remember on the first read when I got to this one, I thought, okay, halfway through the book, and now I read something again. This really does happen, even for people who love poetry. 1. I do not know much about gods, but I think that the river is a strong brown god, sullen, untamed, and intractable, patient to some degree, at first recognized as a frontier, useful, untrustworthy as a conveyor of commerce, then only a problem confronting the builder of bridges. The problem once solved, the brown god is almost forgotten by the dwellers in cities. Ever, however, implacable, keeping his seasons and rages, destroyer, reminder of what men choose to forget. Unhonored, unpropitiated by worshippers of the machine, but waiting, watching, and waiting. His rhythm was present in the nursery bedroom, in the rank ailanthus of the April dooryard, in the smell of grapes on the autumn table, and the evening circle in the winter gaslight. The river is within us. The sea is all about us. The sea is the land's edge also, the granite into which it reaches, the beaches where it tosses its hints of earlier and other creation. The starfish, the horseshoe crab, the whale's backbone, the pools where it offers to our curiosity the more delicate algae, and the sea anemone. It tosses up our losses, the torn seine, the shattered lobster pot, the broken oar, and the gear of foreign dead men. The sea has many voices, many gods and many voices. The salt is on the briar rose, the fog is in the fir trees. The sea howl and the sea yelp are different voices, often together heard, the whine and the rigging, the menace and caress of wave that breaks on water, the distant rote of the granite teeth, and the wailing warning from the approaching headland. All are sea voices, and the heaving groaner rounded homewards and the sea god. And under the oppression of the silent fog, the tolling bell measures time, not our time, rung by the unhurried ground swell, a time older than the time of chronometers, older than time counted by anxious, worried women lying awake, calculating the future, trying to unweave, unwind, unravel, and piece together the past and the future between midnight and dawn, when the past is all deception, the future futureless, before the morning watch, when time stops, and time is never ending, and the ground swell that is and was from the beginning clangs the bell. I'll read from the end now. The last chapter is called Little Gidding. And it has significance for Eliot's faith, in that it was a place, I forget his first name, but the last name was Farrar. In the late 17th century, it was the site of an attempted utopian community where they attempted to live their life based on the liturgy of the hours. So kind of a, I think I read the other day the word for it now is apostolate, where they try to live with us, and that didn't really work out, but I went to a place in southern Indiana like that called New Harmony, and I think there's something in a place like that where people have at least tried to live in that kind of communal fellowship that stays in the place. It stays and it feels sacred and peaceful. But this first section kind of talks about, uses a metaphor that we use often, the seasons of our lives, and talks about how we rarely get through the spring and the summer without a little bit of November, Norway. And often when we get to winter, we find a little surprise of spring still waiting for us. 1. Midwinter spring is its own season, sempiternal, though sodden towards sundown, suspended in time between pole and tropic. When the short day is brightest with frost and fire, the brief sun flames the ice on pond and ditches in windless coal that is the heart's heat, reflecting in a watery mirror, a glare that is blindness in the early afternoon and glow more intense than blaze of branch or brazier, stirs the dumb spirit. No wind but Pentecostal fire in the dark time of the year. Between melting and freezing, the soul's sap quivers. There is no earth smell or smell of living thing. This is the springtime, but not in time's covenant. Now the hedgerow is blanched for an hour with transitory blossom of snow, a bloom more sudden than that of summer, neither budding nor fading, not in the scheme of generation. Where is the summer, the unimaginable zero summer? If you came this way, taking the route you would be likely to take, from the place you would be likely to come from, if you came this way in May time, you would find the hedges white again in May, with voluptuary sweetness. It would be the same at the end of the journey, if you came at night like a broken king. If you came by day not knowing what you came for, it would be the same when you leave the rough road and turn behind the pigsty to the dull facade and the tombstone. And what you thought you came for is only a shell, a husk of meaning, from which the purpose breaks only when it is fulfilled, if at all. Either you had no purpose, or the purpose is beyond the end you figured and is altered in fulfillment. There are other places which also are the world's end, some at the sea jaws, or over a dark lake, in a desert or a city. But this is the nearest in place and time, now and in England. If you came this way, taking any route, starting from anywhere at any time or at any season, it would always be the same. You would have to put off sense and notion. You are not here to verify, instruct yourself, or inform curiosity, or carry report. You are here to kneel where prayer has been valid, and prayer is more than an order of words, the conscious occupation of the praying mind, or the sound of the voice praying. And what the dead had no speech for, when living, they can tell you, being dead. The communication of the dead is tongued with fire beyond the language of the living. Here, the intersection of the timeless moment is England and nowhere, never and always. And this is how he ends it. What we call the beginning is often the end, and to make an end is to make a beginning. The end is where we start from, and every phrase and sentence that is right, where every word is at home, taking its place to support the others, the word neither diffident nor ostentatious, an easy commerce of the old and the new, the common word exact without vulgarity, the formal word precise but not pedantic, the complete consort dancing together. Every phrase and every sentence is an end and a beginning, every poem an epitaph, and any action is a step to the block, to the fire, down the sea's throat, or to an illegible stone, and that is where we start. We die with the dying. See, they depart, and we go with them. We are born with the dead. See, they return and bring us with them. The moment of the rose and the moment of the yew tree are of equal duration. A people without history is not redeemed from time, for history is a pattern of timeless moments. So while the light fails on a winter's afternoon in a secluded chapel, history is now in England. With the drawing of this love and the voice of this calling, we shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. Through the unknown remembered gate, when the last of earth left to discover is that which was the beginning, at the source of the longest river, the voice of the hidden waterfall, and the children in the apple tree, not known because not looked for, but heard, half heard, in the stillness between two waves of the sea. Quick now, here, now, always, a condition of complete simplicity, costing not less than everything. And all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well, when the tongues of flame are enfolded into the crowded knot of fire, and the fire and the rose are one. And that's it. Thank you.
Welcome back to the open mic. We have 5 readers tonight, and we'll start with Marian MacLeod.
Yay. I just thought of sharing this when I pulled into the parking lot. Sort of a last minute thing, but Emily Dickinson wrote several poems on the subject of beauty, and every one of them was a little bit strange. And I started thinking about that, and I thought she must have decided that she was not beautiful, and she must have been fascinated with the subject enough to devote time to expressing those feelings. But the one, and I did actually, back when I was working on a degree in music composition and theory at the University of Iowa, I created a song cycle of 3 of Emily Dickinson's poems on beauty. The first one, and that's the only one I'll share tonight, is I Died for Beauty. I died for beauty, and was scarce adjusted in the tomb when one who died for truth was laid in an adjoining room. He questions softly why I failed. For beauty, I replied, and I for truth. The two are one. We brethren are, he said. And so, as kinsmen met a night, we talked between the rooms until the moss had reached our lips and covered up our names.
Next reader is Judy Merrill-Smith.
Hi everybody. I'm new in town. My bachelor's degree is in English, but I don't write a lot anymore, so this is like the first time I've done poetry in a million years. This poem kind of came to me as a visual image, and I wrote it down, and I'm not sure that it's done, or I'm not sure if it's finished or if it's a fragment, but I'll read it to you. She spoke of whales and mermaids in the dark, longing to see the glitter of sunlight on the surface. And she spoke of one who finally rode to the top on the back of a humpback and never went down to the depths ever again.
Our next performer is Matthew Williams.
No, I get Every time I put on this strap, I always think it should be even higher. See this? There. I got a joke to say. How do you get somebody to buy something they don't want or need? You give them all of your money and you tell them it's free. Well, the first song I'm going to do is a song of mine, and it's called The Wake Near White Meadows. And yeah, I'm just going to play it. Rising water below river steel, light from the keyhole walks away. Spirits weep and catfish sing. Many lovers have been made. Welcome to her spring. Dancing water, hidden evening, oh, oh, oh. Old friend down the way walks away. Asking Roger beside cleaved bone, the wake near White Meadows. Came to stay. Came to stay. Came to stay. Spirit sweet and catfish sing. Many lovers have been made. Welcome to her spring. Next song I want to do is so I had all these experiences, and I thought this was a neat song to sum that up, and it's kind of interesting. I had two people that I really loved, and then before I could say what I wanted to say, they both died. So this is written by one of my favorite musicians, and his name is Daniel Johnson, and it's one of his songs called "True Love Will Find You in the End." And it was like true love will find you in the end. You'll find out just who's been your friend. Don't be sad, I know you will. Don't give up until true love will find you in the end. This is a promise with a catch, 'cause only if you're looking can it find you. Because true love is searching too. And how can it reach you unless you step out into the light, the light? Don't be sad, I know you will. Don't give up until true love will find you in the end.
That's all?
Yep.
Oh, darn.
Next, we have Audrey Hutchison.
I'm just learning to be a poet, so I'm going to Jillena as my professor. So I'm going to read a poem by Kipling. Most of his poems are kind of political or about animals in the jungle, but or covered up political with animals. But I found one that was kind of whimsical, and I liked it. So it's in his second volume, and it's called My Rival. Can you hear me all right? Mm-hmm. Okay. I go to concert, party, ball. What profit is in these? I sit alone against the wall and strive to look at ease. The incense that is mine by right, they burn before her shrine. That's because I'm 17 and she's 49. I cannot check my girlish blush. My color comes and goes. I redden to my fingertips and sometimes to my nose. But she in white where white should be and red where red should shine. The blush that flies at 17 is fixed at 49. I wish I had her constant cheek. I wish that I could sing all sorts of funny little songs, not quite the proper thing. I'm very gauche, I think, and very shy. Her jokes aren't in my line. And worst of all, I'm 17 and she's 49. The young men come and the young men go, each pink and white and neat. She's older than their mothers, but they grovel at her feet. They walk beside her, rickshaw wheels. None ever walk by mine, and that's because I'm 17 and she is 49. She rides with half a dozen men. She calls them boys and mashes. I trot along the mall alone. My prettiest frocks and sashes don't help to fill my program card. He spelled it different. Program card. And vainly I repine from 10 to 2 a.m. Ah me, would I were 49. She calls me darling, pet, and dear, and sweet retiring maid. I'm always at the back, I know. She puts me in the shade. She introduces me to men, caste lovers, I opine. For 60 takes to 17, and 19 to 49. But even she must older grow and end her dancing days. She can't go on forever, so at concerts, balls, and plays, one ray of priceless hope I see before my footsteps shine. Just think that she'll be 81 when I am 49.
And he'll be still around.
And finally, Renee Dreiling.
I want to thank the ladies for sharing what they did earlier. It was really great. I brought a favorite of mine by Wallace Stevens, The Emperor of Ice Cream.
Oh, yay.
Yeah, I was going to get nods. Call the roller of big cigars, the muscular one, and bid him whip in kitchen cups concupiscent curds. Let the wenches dawdle in such dress as they are used to wear, and let the boys bring flowers in last month's newspapers. Let be finale of scene. The only emperor is the emperor of ice cream. Take from the dresser of deal, lacking the 3 glass knobs, that sheet on which she embroidered fantails once, and spread it so as to cover her face. If her horny feet protrude, they come to show how cold she is, and dumb. Let the lamp affix its beam. The only emperor is the emperor of ice cream. Thank you.
Well, thanks everybody. That was wonderful. Anyone else want to read? Last minute? We have time. Otherwise, we'll see you back on March 14th for Renee Dreiling. And thanks everyone for coming.